When we started this series, we wanted to know what is the other side, what is the motivation of Islamic extremism, and how much does it affect our own position in the West? How much are we challenged by the extremism and terrorism? When we started, that was shortly after Charlie Hebdo. So we went through a number of events, and some of you have been following it, and thank you very much for being here also tonight. And tonight's event is on the trafficking of cultural materials, appropriation of mankind's property. When we started this, and when I say we, I mean Alexander Nagel, who will be the moderator of tonight, we thought that the cultural heritage that we are talking about in this sense is something which belongs to all mankind. It's kind of like a commons, like something which we have known from the Middle Ages, a term which has been gained some new attraction nowadays, where we share things and where we don't let them be private property. So we look at the archaeological heritage as something which belongs to all mankind. And therefore, every form of appropriation, of making this something which is alienated from its place of origin and being displaced somewhere else and being appropriated in terms of physical traffic or also of ownership, is something which is the topic of tonight. What does it mean, and how much does it affect the notion of the mankind's property, namely the property of all humankind? Archaeology has helped and helps understand mankind and helps us to understand our own history as human beings, with all the varieties that have been occurring during the last many thousand years. So archaeology needs contact with the soil and the contact with the findings of that soil. So I'm very happy that we have experts among us who are from the field of archaeology and can share with us their insights and their experience from the Middle East, but also with extension to other areas of the world. Before we start, let me say thank you to New York University and the Bradema Center, who have been hosting us in this series until today, and there will be one more panel. I say thank you on behalf of UNIC, which is the European Network of Institutes of Culture, who have been combining forces. Today, I want to say especially thank you to the Italian Cultural Institute. Michele is here. And I also want to say thank you to the Middle East Institute, who has been sponsoring tonight's presentation of Mrs. Tess Davis. Let me briefly introduce the moderator of tonight. Alexander Nagel has an MA from the Humboldt University zu Berlin and a PhD from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He has a special field. His special field is the colors, gilding, and painted motifs in Persepolis. So he is an expert for Persian architectural heritage in its own field, which is something which is about 2,500 years away from today. His dissertation will be turned into a book, and I think we are all looking forward to that. He has experience in excavations in Greece and teaching experience in Berlin, in Ann Arbor, and recently here with the University of Maryland. He was involved as a colleague of the Smithsonian in exhibitions such as Ancient Iranian Ceramics, Nomads and Networks recently, and the Nile and Ancient Egypt. I'm very happy, Alexander, that you are hosting this event. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear my voice? Am I loud enough? Okay. So I also want to express my sincere gratitude to New York University, to the Brademas Center for hosting, and to Dr. Eckstein also, who pushed really for the last couple of months also to have events related to iconoclash throughout DC. So thank you also to the Italian partners and to everyone involved in getting this event together for tonight. So we have 3 excellent speakers. I know many of them also, so it is a personal dream also that becomes a little bit true tonight by hearing fantastic speakers who are renowned archaeologists, art lawyers. And I'm going to introduce the first speaker, Ms. Teresa Davis, who's the executive director of the Washington, D.C.-based non-for-profit Antiquities Coalition. Tess is overseeing the organization's work to fight cultural racketeering worldwide. And as a lawyer, she has also been an archaeologist by training initially. She began her career at the Archaeological Institute of America, and prior to her current position was the executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Cultural Heritage Preservation, another non-for-profit institution based here in Washington, D.C. She has previously worked for the non-governmental organization Heritage Watch in Cambodia, first as a project coordinator, then as an assistant director. And since 2013, she has also been affiliated with the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research at the University of Glasgow. It's a great honor to have you here, Tess, so I welcome you to the podium. Let's start.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you. Are you able to hear me okay? Yes? Microphone working? So thank you, Alex, for the introduction, and also thank you for the invitation. It's a true honor to be here and this with such distinguished colleagues, hosted by such amazing organizations. It means a lot to me, and to talk about a subject that is very important to me as well. So you may be wondering why I'm talking about Cambodia at an event so focused on the crisis that's happening today in the Middle East and North Africa. Well, today the global hotspot is what was once Mesopotamia and is now Iraq and Syria. But 40 years ago, it was Indochina. It was Vietnam, it was Laos, it was Cambodia. And in Cambodia, which is internationally celebrated for its 12th century temples of Angkor Wat, fighting erupted between government forces and the communist Khmer Rouge in 1970. It would not end until 1998 with the death of Pol Pot and the subsequent surrender of his remaining forces. And within those decades, there was civil war, there was genocide, there was a decade of foreign occupation by Vietnam, one of the true tragedies of the 20th century, which you see here. So this Cambodian civil war, it triggered, as we're seeing today in Iraq and Syria. It triggered organized antiquities looting and trafficking, and this helped to further bankroll further violence. This cultural racketeering, this organized looting and trafficking, it went hand in hand with what lawyers are increasingly calling cultural cleansing, which is the deliberate and systematic destruction of a group and their cultural heritage, with the intention of not just wiping out a people, but wiping out all evidence of them. But sadly, this is not just history. Cambodia's tragedy is being repeated today in the cradle of civilization as the Islamic State, or ISIS, or ISIL, or Daesh, as it's called by various different people, is waging an unrelenting assault on the people of Iraq and Syria and their rich cultural heritage. So today I'll be talking a little bit about a case study comparing these crimes against culture during the Cambodian Civil War with what we're seeing today, in the hopes that it does pose some lessons, but it also definitely poses a warning of the consequences of if we don't take this very seriously. Now, I realize I'm at an event, again, dealing with the Middle East, so just a few words of background on Cambodia. Cambodia was the heart of the ancient Khmer Empire, which at one point was the most powerful force in Southeast Asia. During the Angkorian period from the 9th to 15th century, It ruled an area that covered what is now modern-day Cambodia, but also Thailand, parts of Vietnam, parts of Laos, parts of Burma. But the 20th century, Cambodia's 20th century, was not one of this greatness, but one of colonialism, hardship, and chaos, as the country shuddered from being a French protectorate to a French colony through independence and eventually, of course, civil war and continued decades of war. Again, the conflict started in 1970 when the government forces the Vietnam War spilled into Cambodia. And the ill-equipped and ill-tested Cambodian army was no match for the communist forces, who by this point had already been fighting themselves for quite a long time in Vietnam. By the end of 1970, just months after the war began, the line of fire actually was right outside the Temple of Angkor. And Phnom Penh finally fell to the Khmer Rouge in April of 1975. In fact, the anniversary, it will be next Wednesday. Beginning one of the darkest periods, not just in the country's history, but in the history of the 20th century that we today call the killing fields. So the Khmer Rouge were fanatically devoted to this pursuit of a communist agrarian state, and they immediately evacuated the country's urban centers, Phnom Penh included, forced their inhabitants out into the countryside. They abolished education, except that educating you about how great the state was. They abolished banks, they abolished money, they abolished religion. And they purged those not only associated with the defeated Cambodian government, but also associated with the West. And being associated with the West could be something as simple as wearing eyeglasses. By 1979, when the Vietnamese drove the Khmer Rouge from power, 2 million people were dead. This is out of a country of 8 million people. So, I mean, just think of that. In a matter of years, for a fourth of the population to be gone, to starvation, disease, and outright murder. So the human, and of course after this, even after this tragedy, the war would continue another 15 years. The human toll of this conflict was absolutely immeasurable. But the Cambodian people were not the only victims. For 3 decades, their cultural heritage was the victim not just of neglect, not just of indiscriminate attacks, it wasn't just collateral damage, but of an intentional, targeted, multifaceted, and sustained attack. The Khmer Rouge declared an outright war on Cambodian culture, old and new, religious and secular, tangible and intangible, and this attack was both practical and ideological. See, the Khmer Rouge sought to obliterate traditional Cambodian culture with this new revolutionary culture. They said they were returning to year zero, starting over. But in doing so, they were also looking back, and what they were looking back to was Angkor Wat, to this height of the Khmer people, to a time when Cambodia was the most powerful force in Southeast Asia. This was also, as you see here, they had, this is the flag of the Khmer Rouge and some of their party propaganda. They had Angkor Wat on the flag. Of course, Angkor was an empire that was built on the backs of slave labor, and I'm sure that was not lost upon them either. And while it represented their ideal, it also represented their greatest fear. And that was that these 2 expanding giants to their borders, Thailand and Vietnam, would one day overwhelm them. Angkor did fall to Siam in the 1400s. And this fear justified their already neurotic mistrust of foreigners, Eastern and Western, and further served to advance the belief that Cambodian society must be purely Khmer or Cambodian and purged of all outside influences. And if their country was to be as successful as Angkor, self-sufficiency was key. So this is what the Khmer Rouge believed, and they used Angkor to popularize this belief to the Cambodian people. Now, as we all know, the Khmer Rouge were not the first to use or misuse history, and they weren't the first to even use or misuse Angkor in this way. All the different governments of Cambodia have had Angkor Wat on their flag, and there's actually been a lot of different governments of Cambodia in the 20th century. Again, all of them have had the Angkor on their flag. I believe it's the only national flag in the world that has a monument on it. Cambodian monarchies, democracies, communist regimes, despite these different ideologies, they all chose this as their symbol. Now, and as I mentioned, in part, the Khmer Rouge used this symbol to gain support for their cause throughout the countryside. They would draw these comparisons between themselves and the leaders of Angkor, much as previous leaders and much as the leaders in Cambodia today do. They found it very useful to link themselves to this myth. So again, this featured on the flag, it featured in party songs, on party posters, it featured heavily in the propaganda. It was part of the Khmer Rouge narrative, and the Khmer Rouge controlled, as many genocidal regimes tend to do, they controlled this narrative very strictly from the top down. So it may surprise you that despite this, there was a lot of looting and trafficking going on in Cambodia during the war years. On the one hand, you would think they would protect Angkor. It was so important as a symbol to their image. And indeed, they did when they were in charge of the country, when the Khmer Rouge actually controlled the state for these 3.5 years, these years we call the killing fields. Angkor was very well protected. If you tried to loot it, you were put to death, as you were put to death for just about anything. But this changed when Cambodia was ousted by the Vietnamese in 1979, and they went from being a state to being a guerrilla force. And as word of their atrocities spread, they needed money because they lost key international backers like Thailand and eventually even China. They needed money. And so what did they do when they needed money? They turned to the resources they had with them. Now, there's actually a quote from Pol Pot around this time period, when China was being lost as a backer, that said, "Our state does not have sufficient capital either to expand its strength or enlarge the army. The resources we have absolutely must be utilized as assets." And this was included, of course, guns, gun trafficking shot up across the Thai border, gemstones, timbers, and indeed antiquities. The Khmer Rouge did thorough work, along with other armed forces operated in the country at the time. And indeed, we found that pretty much every army occupying Cambodia at any point in time did traffic antiquities for the same reason. And before the conflict finally ended in 1998, these temples had been wholly plundered, their sacred artworks smuggled out of the country and sold to the highest bidder. Temples that had stood for 1,000 years, largely intact until this war in 1970. We know that. We have photographs and tons of documentation of them from the 1960s, these sites wholly intact. And I've spent a great deal of time in Cambodia, been working there for over a decade, I've traveled extensively, I've lived there, and I've never been to a single site that has not just been looted, but extensively looted, and this all happened in a matter of years. Now again, this organized looting and trafficking went hand in hand with this cultural cleansing, because the cultural sites that the Khmer Rouge could not use for profit, that they could not use for propaganda, they destroyed. Not accidentally, not recklessly, not while pursuing other military objectives. The destruction of these sites was the objective. There were signs that this would happen before the country fell, as we saw signs that this would happen in Iraq and Syria before parts of those countries fell, that when the Khmer Rouge would move into an area, they would destroy the local pagodas, they would kill the monks, they'd kill the Cham Vietnamese who were often Catholic, who were Muslim, and the Vietnamese who were often Catholic. And word of this was getting out before the country itself fell. And when the country fell, the damage got much worse. Intense damage was inflicted on the mosque of the Cham people. About 130 of these were destroyed, and those communities have had a very hard time coming back because they were specifically targeted as well as part of this genocide. And every single Christian place of worship in the country, and there were quite a few because Vietnamese are often Christian, were destroyed. They even took apart the cathedral in Phnom Penh stone by stone. And Buddhism was not spared. This destruction is part of their systematic attack on it. They desecrated or destroyed most of Cambodia's 3,300 pagodas. And this was one reason they did this was because the monks often were very involved in politics. They had been involved in the independence movement, for example. So this would have provided a means to protest the Khmer Rouge regime. And of course, once you destroy all that is sacred to a people, the next step is to destroy the people themselves. Whoops. Having technical difficulties there. So first the Khmer Rouge came for the Wats, the mosques, the churches, and then they came for the Buddhists, for the Muslims, and for the Catholics. They wanted to recreate Cambodian culture, so they came for the cultural bearers, the artists, the dancers, the singers, and they wanted to rewrite history. And if you want to rewrite history, you have to kill the historians, you have to kill the archaeologists. I've been told that of the many, many archaeologists who were in the country when it fell, that only 4 survived who stayed. So this destruction of monuments, of religious buildings, of libraries and archives, this is an atrocity crime in itself. But in Cambodia, as it was in Armenia, as it was in Warsaw, as it was in the Balkans, it's a sign of atrocities that are worse to come. And it was these attacks on Cambodia's culture that made the rebuilding after the war so difficult, that is still making it so difficult today, according to Yuk Cheng, who's one of the top experts on the genocide in the country. He said this cultural devastation left Cambodians unmoored, deepening their suffering from the loss of their loved ones and significantly complicating their attempts to reconstruct society. Now, this is just one country at one point in time, but I think we all recognize the pattern, and I think that pattern makes something very clear. Attacks on culture are an issue of global security and human rights. And again, we're seeing these parallels to Daesh today, starting with the misuse of history to gain legitimacy for an illegitimate cause, to the organized looting and trafficking to fund this type of violence that's going on. Right here you see Tom Mok, who is one of the top Khmer Rouge cadres, number 4, but people also think that he actually murdered Pol Pot in an attempt to take power of the entire Khmer Rouge near the end. And these are statues that were seized from his villa when he was arrested for the War Crime Tribunal that were awaiting sale across the border in Thailand. 61 museum-quality masterpieces. Here you see Abu Sayyaf. He was Daesh's head of financial operations. He was killed in a raid by U.S. Special Forces in Syria. And what did they find in his compound? They found antiquities awaiting transport across the Syrian border. They also found, and I wish I'd included pictures of these now, actually, they also found detailed organizational charts about ISIS's trafficking of antiquities, stationery for the Department of Antiquities. They have a marketing department in the Department of Antiquities, marketing and sale, and receipts totaling $1.25 million over a 3-month period. Now just think about that. That's receipts from one individual from one raid that he happened to have on him for 3 months, totaling transactions worth $1.25 million. We have that on paper. That's a fact. So that was in common. And then, of course, this targeted destruction, these attacks on history as a precursor to genocide. And of course, genocide is what always follows these attacks. You can't have genocide without destroying the culture of the people who go with it. So the consequences of this, again, go much beyond preservation. This is a matter of global security. It's a matter of human rights. And it's, I think, a warning to us all that what's happening now is just not, again, about culture. It's about so much more. That said, I would like to land on a somewhat positive note in an otherwise depressing presentation by saying that when my parents were alive, the idea of going to Angkor Wat for a holiday was about as remote as it is for us to go to Palmyra today on holiday. And yet, today, Cambodia, having gone through all that they've gone through, is a thriving, optimistic, hopeful country. It is rebuilding, welcoming millions of tourists every year, and now launching a campaign to recover some of these pieces that were stolen during the war and having much success for that. And so I'll end with a few words that were said by the Secretary of State of Cambodia, who's actually handling a lot of these statue negotiations at an event the Antiquities Coalition hosted in New York. And he reached out to the Iraqi foreign minister who was there, and he said, "We know what you're going through, and there is light at the end of the tunnel, and one day you will be at peace, your children will be at peace, and you will bring these masterpieces home." And so I think we all are looking very forward to that day happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tess. So we continue actually with regions that are not so well known to most of the US audience. So our second speaker is Dr. Iris Gerlach from the German Archaeological Institute in Berlin. So you will hear more German accent now. An archaeologist with a focus on Near Eastern archaeology, classical archaeology, and Assyriology. Dr. Gerlach became the head of the SANA, that is the Yemen branch, of the Orient Department of the German Archaeological Institute in 2000. And as director of various archaeological projects, she has worked in Yemen, in Ethiopia, and Qatar. And her research interests are South Arabian and pre-Aksumite archaeology, so that is mostly Ethiopia. She works on cultural context, especially the trade and migration, temples and religion, ancient water management, burial rites, and art history. And she's also, and this is important for us tonight, since 2011, the director of a project where she's monitoring and doing awareness-raising projects dealing with the looting of museums, illegal excavations of archaeological sites, and other destruction of cultural heritage in Yemen. Please welcome Dr. Gerlach.
Where's play now? Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express my greatest gratitude to Mr. Eckstein for inviting me to this event this evening and to talk about a little bit about Yemen and about looting of objects, but also about the destruction of the sites there. War and an increasingly unstable political situation in the Near East, above all in the countries of Syria, Iraq, and Yemen too, sadly forgotten by most of the world, have led to devastating collateral damage to culture, material, and the plunder of museums, and also, as we have seen also before with horror, to the religion-motivated destruction of entire culture, archaeological sites, pre-Islamic as well as Islamic ones. Moreover, increasingly professional organized looting is blossoming one side after the other, especially in regions where the central government has no longer control, has been pillaged, in some cases systematically plowed with bulldozers and plundered, leaving behind what looks like a pitted battlefield. Once taken out of the country, the looted objects land on the international antiquity market for private collectors. Very few items are offered for sale publicly in auction houses. Most are sold directly to interest persons via unknown channels. The question of the provenience of the objects does not play any role at all, or it is of minor interest. The Orient Department of the German Archaeological Institute in Sanaa is working closely with the German Federal Criminal Police and with Interpol against the theft and ruins of culture goods and art in Yemen. But this is only, so to say, a drop of water in the bucket. Nevertheless, in addition to false documents, we can identify objects that clearly derive from illegal excavations as well as many other falsifications. We are helping ICOM to set up the emergency red list of Yemeni culture objects at risk, which compared to such lists created, for instance, for Syria and Iraq, depicted objects, also not stolen objects, they depict objects which illustrate the categories or types of culture goods that are most likely to be illegally traded. The list is not only for the customs officers. Museums, auction houses, art dealers, and collectors are encouraged not to acquire such objects without having carefully researched their origin and all the relevant legal documentation. We all know that here, unfortunately, wish and reality lie far apart. However, all these actions and consultations and events like this one this evening do contribute towards revealing to the public and sensitizing people about the illicit traffic in culture objects and to promote an awareness of and a change in the attitude toward. However, illicit excavations are not limited to the countries of the Near East, as you already heard before. Indeed, they are a worldwide problem. The objects, valuable in a material sense, are wrenched from the ground without any scientific excavation. With that, the context of the find and its culture association are lost, as are other archaeological artifacts and important contents in the vicinity of the looted material, which are the looter presumed were of no value. Yet for scientific study, they too are important pieces of a puzzle with which the past culture can be reconstructed. Thus, illicit diggings always signify an immeasurable and irreplaceable loss for the history and for the respective country, and also for the mutual cultural heritage of humankind. Illegal trade in culture goods counts, therefore, as organized criminality. The argument that dealers and collectors are saving these antiquities from the culture vandalism of the Islamic State is false. Quite the contrary, they are building up the base for an illegal antiquities market. But let us go back one step and first consider our vested duty and responsibility, which are to protect and preserve our own culture possessions as well as those of other lands, in order to hand them down to future generations. We have the need to study our past, not only as I do as an archaeologist, but far more to protect and preserve the irreplaceable evidence of our intellectual and historical development. The cause for this may be, amongst others, pictures burned into our collective memory. We saw already some of them, whether this past culture transgressions out of military calculations, out of ideologies that based upon terror or religion fanatism like iconoclasm during the Reformation or the wanted breaking of monarchical images during the French Revolution, or almost the most comprehensive destruction of all kinds during peacetime by the Red Guard in China during the Cultural Revolution. Yet even more culture goods were destroyed during the Second World War. The amount of intentionally devastated cultural material under Hitler's Germany is incomprehensibly immense. How do all our present-day norms to protect cultural property correspond with the illegal trade in culture goods, and to what extent are we also responsible? The demand for antiquities was and still is unbroken. Especially in times of economic recession, culture items are viewed as secure investments with which the owners can increase their prestige as well. Increasingly unstable political conditions in the Near East have formed the, so to say, ideal conditions for the exploitation of culture resources. Offered on the antiquity markets at auctions and exhibited correspondingly very aesthetically, the objects show no clue to their resource from illegal diggings. Nothing refers to the irreparable damage and loss of culture heritage caused for the lands of origin and ultimately for the entire world, not to mention the loss for research due to the lost find context. Trade in antiquity with unknown origin is also enhanced, for example, when public exhibitions such as the George Ortiz collection in the Old Museum in Berlin 1996, before that in St. Petersburg, Moscow and London, are allowed. The Ortiz exhibit was based purely aesthetical aspect of objects most of unknown origin, which the private collector had accumulated over 40 years' time. Such events organized by the state, which here speaking for Germany, are unthinkable in this form today and already met with public criticism at that time. They represent a presumed gain in prestige for the collector and his intent to legitimize his collection through public exhibition. The same applies to all scientific discourse and also public lectures that pertain to objects of unsure origin from the art market. Scientific studies of such objects not only increment the item's value, through, so to say, sanction the illegal deal in antiquities, but they also foster the vicious circle of supply and demand. Furthermore, Germany, the German government, is currently planning an amendment to its regulation on culture goods. Among other restrictions, the import of culture goods to Germany requires a specific permission for the respective land of origin to export the objects. The trade in antiquities must be restricted to objects of clear acquisition and legal origin. Yet not all culture goods are no longer in their land of origin should be viewed as per se looted articles. It depends solely upon the legitimacy of their acquisition. But let us look at the situation in Yemen, where war has been underway, as you know, for more than a year now. The victims are, as usual, the local people. Moreover, Yemen's unique cultural treasures are being severely affected by this war. Whether or not some places have been the target of premeditated destruction and heavy conflicts cannot be verified. But the collateral damage alone is immense. I do not hold a political position in this conflict, but it is quite evident that the Saudi Arabian military coalition not only takes the destruction of culture goods into account in order to attain their political aims. Reports about the plunder of museums in areas controlled by Al-Qaeda are increasing. The systematic illicit diggings have taken an alarming dimensions. Due to the war, no regular excavation and archaeological fieldwork are being conducted in Yemen. Yet, nevertheless, the number of objects offered on international art markets has increased steadily. These objects are declared to be from old collections and thus may be traded legally. So here the question arises as to how these objects could be taken out of Yemen at such an early time, so around the 1970s and earlier. Namely, scientific research in Yemen first began only as late as the 1980s, with a few exceptions such as excavation by the American Foundation for the Study of Man at the beginning of the 1950s. Thus, all the objects from older collections could not have derived from scientific fieldwork. Quite the opposite. They must have come from illegal diggings and nowadays also from looting museums. We here, the international community in close network, must actively support the affected countries in protecting and preserving the cultural monuments and sites. The German Archaeological Institute is well aware of this responsibility in this concern and is carrying out numerous projects within the field of capacity building in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Here still 2013 it was possible to do it in Yemen. Now we are doing it from Berlin in Jordan, and also we are create a handbook in how to deal with cultural heritage in Yemen and with online courses. And also together with the Museum of Islamic Art, the German Archaeological Institute has set up a database on existing images and research information about Syrian cultural sources in the Syrian Heritage Archive project, and a similar project is launched by my institute for Yemen. This is of special importance for a measure towards protecting and reconstructing in the future. The German Archaeological Institute is also partner in the UNESCO campaign #Unite for Heritage. Thereby the focus is on sharpening public awareness of the connection between the destruction of culture goods and illegal trade in antiquities. Also in action like the Yemeni Heritage Week, Museums United for Yemen, end of April this year, helps to raise awareness for the situation in Yemen. There's still much to accomplish in order to protect cultural resources more effectively worldwide. Stricter and more stringent legislation might help to curb the trade in antiquities. However, the gradual change in awareness that has taken place in the past years regarding acquisition of cultural goods with vague origin must continue to be increased, not only on a national but also on an international level. As the saying goes, it is really 5 minutes before midnight. And the uncontrolled dealings in antiquities and the devastation of cultural heritage have taken on a new and alarming professional form, also due to the growing supply and demand. So in addition to programs to enhance an awareness of this vicious circle and on-site support, stricter laws against illegal dealers as well as customers of illicit culture goods must be enforced. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Iris. So our third speaker for tonight's evening is Douglas Boyne, an internationally recognized authority on the archaeology, religion, and history of the Roman world. Douglas is currently assistant professor of history at St. Louis University and is the author of 2 really critically acclaimed books. One is called Ostia in Late Antiquity, published in 2013, and one is called Coming Out Christian in the Roman World, which was published only last year in 2015. He's currently working on a 3rd book on late antiquity, it's cultural history. He also has published in renowned journals like the American Journal of Archaeology, the Journal of Roman Studies, and the Papers of the British School at Rome. Has written for popular venues like Time, the New York Times, like Huffington Post, Biblical Archaeology, and is also on the board of Saving Antiquities for Everyone, SAFE. So please welcome Dr. Douglas Boyne.
Thank you so much, Alex. Can you hear me? My microphone is good? Excellent. This February, the great Italian writer Umberto Eco passed away after a century-long career in novel writing, academia, journalism, and public engagement. I came to Eco when I was a college student here in Washington. When strolling through the bookstores for summer reading, I stumbled across an English course with an assignment in it in which students were asked to read The Name of the Rose. And I picked it up, and it was filled with whole pages of Latin. And because I had been a student of Latin since high school and had just returned from Rome, I picked it up and began now 15-year conversation with this brilliant and prolific and sometimes maddening storyteller. 2 weeks ago, when I was in Rome, I had a chance to pick up his last book, the one that he published before he died, and it's on my dining room table at home until I have time to read it. The reason I wanted to start with Umberto Eco today is twofold. First, I wanted to find a very personal way to say thank you to my hosts, the Istituto Italiano di Cultura. My research has taken me for many years now to and from Italy, and I'm very fortunate to feel at home in the academic community there, as well as on the streets of several neighborhoods in Rome that I should probably not say that I frequent. The second reason I wanted to begin with Umberto Eco, however, has to do with the plot of the story that so captivated me 15 years ago, In the Name of the Rose. It has much more relevance to today's conversations and the panel topics that we've been engaging with than we might suspect. It's set in the Middle Ages, after a time of Christian and Islamic hostility in the Crusades. But the story is ultimately a murder mystery that takes place in a monastery in Italy. Over the course of 7 days, 7 monks are murdered for trying to gain access to one of the most prized books in the library. It is the second book on the theory of art written by the philosopher Aristotle. Today, this book no longer exists in any version or any copy. we only have part 1. That is a historical fact. The monks of the Middle Ages knew. Actually, it's a historical fact that the monks of the Middle Ages knew the text, both books of it. And in Umberto Eco's retelling of the story, some of them tried to keep their Christian neighbors from reading it because they found Aristotle's ideas too dangerous for a Christian mind to handle. By the end of the story, the book and the entire library of the monastery is engulfed in flames. It's a symbol of the closing of the mind that we often associate with religious fanaticism. Today, scholars are on the hunt for ancient texts like the lost book of Aristotle, dramatized in The Name of the Rose. But we live in a world that is much different from the 13th century. The intervening centuries have given birth to values of science and rationality that were meant to challenge the place of religion and the power of zealous belief in shaping society. Today, if you ask a scholar of classics or medieval history what the most exciting development would be for their field, however, they might give you a ready wish list that sounds like the plot of a novel. If only we had another Gospel of Jesus. If only we had a commentary by the Apostle Paul. Or perhaps we had the text of a Quran that dates to the time of Muhammad. We might be able to, well, the dreams of scholars don't need to be articulated to take hold of ordinary people's minds. Who wouldn't want to find, buried in a library somewhere in Europe, an Arabic copy of a lost Christian text? Or perhaps in the Egyptian desert, the torn piece of papyrus that has the earliest gospel fragment written on it? Or maybe the copy of a long-lost poem by a writer whom we've been dying to hear from for centuries since she first published her poetry. What has happened recently, in short, as scholars who have come out of the post-Enlightenment age of reason and rationalist thinking began to lead themselves down these new exciting research avenues, is this. The cultural heritage of things with writing on them, objects with text on them, has become nothing more than an untapped oil field waiting to be pumped and exploited for new information. We don't need to question the motives of scholars today who have made some of these discoveries. They might be greedy, they might be grubby artifact hunters. They could be honestly and earnestly in pursuit of lost text and new knowledge. But what we need to pause to do, and what I'd like to address today, is this. All that has mattered so far has been the treasure, the Holy Grail, of finding an artifact that no one has seen or read in 1,000 years. What no one has ever done, and what has never happened in this frenzy to find new documents, has given any thought to the ethical conversation about who might have owned these objects, or how and when and where this material might have come from. And that is, no one has asked these questions until now. What I want to do in the remaining time, and Alexander has kept me to a 12-minute time frame, so I definitely don't want to go over it because I'd rather that we have time for conversation and questions, is simply give you an overview of some objects that have been found and have made the news quite recently as very famous discoveries, and to show you behind the scenes the conversation that needs to take place both inside the academy and outside the academy about where these objects have come from. Because today, the previous two speakers have talked about the wars and the devastating legacies that lead to the destruction of cultural heritage that infect the art market, for example, and inspire looting. But what I would like to do as the last of the panelists is show you that the market for this material is actually much closer than we think. By the time that I end, I want to show you that the market is actually in this city and being built right on the mall. Many of you will remember the names of some of these pieces. Mrs. Jesus appeared in 2013, and Sappho, the poem that was found by the ancient Greek writer, also made the headlines. Jesus' wife, is Mrs. Jesus, as I call her, was found on a scrap of papyrus that was announced at a conference in Rome in 2012, and has become a cause célèbre in the academic and popular community. The text that purports to tell us that Jesus said to his wife is no larger than the size of an iPhone, but it's written on papyrus, and no one knows where it came from. This has not stopped the media from sensationalizing important discoveries that have texts or anything to do with writing on them. And just to show you how frenzied we can all be about the discovery of a lost gospel or the discovery of a new Quran, my good friend Brent Nongbre, who took the screenshot of CNN one day, I really do have to thank, because when CNN showed this new papyrus fragment that is part of a traveling exhibit that will form part of the Museum of the Bible here in DC, CNN showed it upside down. Because there doesn't seem to be any awareness that, okay, it's an actual text. We're just interested in it as a thing. We're just interested in it as an object. So regardless of the fact that we can't read it, that we're not skilled enough to read ancient Greek, for example, or Latin or Armenian, the issue here is just show the object, because that's the thing that is the treasure. These types of written objects have been found all over the late antique world. And just to give you some context outside the realm of the Mediterranean, Ai-Khanum in Afghanistan, seen here on the Google map, has been the discovery of an incredibly important written text. In the remains of the theater discovered by the French team in the middle of the 20th century, they found a fragment of Sophocles, the Greek playwright. And for you to imagine being a citizen of Ai-Khanum and being able to go to the theater and hear the performance of something that would link you to the culture taking place in Athens, I think is a really remarkable amount of work that papyrus fragment does for us. There are other things that papyrus fragments and parchment are very beneficial for seeing. These are some of them. This was a parchment piece that was found from Afghanistan in the 1990s that was written in Bactrian, which is a language related to Armenian and Greek, which is a legal contract and is actually one part of a whole host of contracts found in Afghanistan that tell us about the customs of the region during the 3rd through 9th century CE. This is a remarkable find because part of the analysis shows that the legal culture of Afghanistan in the 3rd through 9th century CE sounds and looks remarkably similar to the Roman legal culture of the Mediterranean during this time. So we can start to see some cultural exchange currents that are happening because we have these texts. This text, the text that you're seeing on the screen, however, would not be known to scholars had it not surfaced in the antiquities market in the 1990s, when they were purchased without provenance by a private philanthropist who is committed to making them open for study. And that's why they have come to the attention of the public. The question of these objects, I think, is the one that we're addressing today. Should we put things like this back in the desert? Should we put these things back where they were clandestinely found? Or do we learn something so fundamentally new that it's important we go out and find them, regardless of how it is they come to us? The site of Dura Europos in Syria is the last of the examples that I just want to show you, in part because of the devastation that's occurred there during the war. At Dura Europos, for example, the eastern city of the Roman Empire, Dura, was famous for having a large Jewish community. And the synagogue wall paintings from Dura, which are preserved in the Damascus Museum, are some of the most famous archaeological remains from the city. We would not know as much about the Jewish community in Dura were it not for the discovery of, and I'll skip this slide for a second, were it not for the discovery of several parchment fragments that were written in Hebrew and found at the site. All of these parchment fragments are now in Yale, and they show us a little bit more in depth about the people and the culture of ancient Syria. For that reason, while all the devastation was taking place, the Saving Antiquities for Everyone organization decided that we really needed to honor the work of the archaeologists in Syria, like Dr. Khaled al-Assad, for his work at Palmyra in particular, in protecting what it is that the Syrian people have in their midst in the middle of this war. The idea, however, that parchment or papyrus, texts with objects with texts on them, is an important part of cultural heritage protection, is not something that immediately springs to mind when we start talking about the preserving the cultural objects or standing up for against moments of iconoclasm. And yet, papyrus fragments in these texts are vital to understanding the history of the Christian movement or the Jewish community in antiquity, even to the extent that we might see things on them that no other archaeological excavation has testified to yet. This is a papyrus fragment known from the Bodmer collection, and it may preserve, if some scholars are correct, the earliest example of the crucifixion in its lines. Some people have interpreted this graphic that you're seeing as being a representation of Jesus hanging from the cross. These things are debated, but ultimately what we're seeing is the search for texts is vital for people who want to tell their faith history, whether it's in the Christian community or, as recently was revealed in Birmingham last year, in the Islamic and Muslim community, where in the UK, some of the oldest fragments of the Quran have been found that, through dating, have been placed at the end of the 6th century and beginning of the 7th century. These are extraordinary finds. And they've led to a scenario in which people want to play this game at home now. And I have blacked out the name of the school here, and I have covered up the faces of the students because I'm not in the business of trying to out people for partaking in these acts. But what you're seeing is a widely available website and press release from a university that's involved in the process of taking ancient mummy masks from Egypt, washing them with palmolive soap in the sinks of their labs, and trying to find the ancient texts that are underneath the mummy masks so that they can study them because they might be related to, as you see here at the very bottom, the Judeo-Christian story. The ethical issues related to the discovery of objects that are foundational for the history of religion is something that the academic community has only now begun to address. And I serve on a panel and a committee from the Society of Biblical Literature that has recently begun to articulate a new set of standards by which members of the group can present and are allowed to present new archaeological discoveries, so that we have a better indication of where material is coming from and how people have acquired it. In the question and answer session, I might be able to show you the charts and graphs that I just skipped over, but let me just finish here. These questions are going to be vital for people to ask on the street, not just for people in the scholarly community to become morally outraged about, because of things like the Museum of the Bible, which is opening on 4th Street. The Museum of the Bible is itself going to be the display case for the Green collection of ancient religious manuscripts, including papyri, Torahs, and Bibles that have been discovered from all over the world. What I am interested in helping to promote is a greater public awareness for asking where these objects have come from and to tell the story of how they have been acquired in the collection, because I think it's part of the larger conversation all three of the panelists have been interested in today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. So I'm asking actually the three speakers to the front so we can have a small discussion. I'm going to ask a few questions to you, and then you are welcome, of course, to ask your questions to the speakers. My first question actually goes about the role of academics and of those professors who are publishing these items. And as you just mentioned, you are on the board of the Society of Biblical Literature, where you do this kind of review currently about what to present. And as I know from the work of Dr. Iris Gerlach, the German Archaeological Institute has also implemented some regulations about what to publish in their series. Maybe you can expand perhaps a little bit first, Dr. Gerlach, about why the German Archaeological Institute also implemented this, whether there was any resistance perhaps also from within the archaeological community or the academics against such regulations to have on paper.
Yeah, this was the idea to have really clear regulations about what can be published from such objects of unknown origin. And as the UNESCO Convention from 1970 said, to protect these objects and not to publish them makes a lot of sense. So for this reason, we decided to put this in our regulation, and this is very clear. On the one hand side, we have this regulation. On the other hand side, we have the regulation that, for instance, we are not allowed to buy or any objects, for instance, during excavations, when someone is coming and show you some wonderful objects, and you said, wonderful, but we are definitely not allowed to have it. Or if we have an own private collection, we have, before we sign the contract with our institute, we have to show up the whole collection, for instance. Yeah.
Thank you. Doug, maybe you can expand a little bit on the Society of Biblical Literature and the...
So what the Society of Biblical Literature is really interested in stopping right now is the community that will go on eBay, for example, and find a papyrus fragment, or a community at a university that has a kind of faith-driven motive to find new biblical texts. The society wants to stop those texts from coming into the meeting so that the meeting is the first point of presentation of them for the public, without there being any set of regulations or standards recognizing that the UNESCO Heritage Convention agreements really should be guiding how this material is presented. So up until this year, the Society of Biblical Literature has been apart from, let's say, the Archaeological Institute of America in being behind the times, because many scholars who work in the field of religion just want to find their texts. They just want to kind of recapture that sense of treasure hunting that feeds the characters in the medieval stories of Umberto Eco. And yet, if we think about it, that's not how an academic community should run. And so the Society of Biblical Literature is in the process of drawing up standards for asking its presenters, where have you found this material? Where did it come from? Can it be known in a collection prior to the 1970s? And those are important questions that all people should ask when they see Gospel of Jesus' Wife on CNN.
My second question actually would be to Tess and Doug, as representatives of organizations that are raising awareness about the illicit trade of antiquities. You speak for the Antiquities Coalition, you speak for Saving Antiquities for Everyone. In the recent months, I think we see an increase of organizations who try to raise the issue. And there are also multiple organizations like Interpol, like FBI here in the US, Homeland Security, who are looking at this trade that is currently going on. And it's not entirely clear, I think, to many who is responsible in the end for doing the work. How are the Antiquities Coalition and Saving Antiquities for Everyone collaborating also on these means, on the efforts to raise public awareness? Do you work together in this campaign right now?
Yes, so again, I'm with the Antiquities Coalition, which is a not-for-profit based here in Washington, D.C., and our focus is on the fight against cultural racketeering, so the organized looting and trafficking of antiquities, particularly by organized crime and by armed insurgents and terrorist organizations. And we've been very lucky to partner with SAFE in the past And I know you'll be speaking more about SAFE's efforts of awareness building, but I would just like to add right now that anything happening, any solution being implemented is dependent on awareness. Because if the public is not aware, the policymakers are not going to be aware. If the policymakers are not aware and they don't care and they're not held to account, they're not going to be these changes made. And there is a lot that can be done. The problem seems very overwhelming at times and is overwhelming in many respects. And I think that tends to blind us to the practical and concrete solutions that are out there that we can be doing, things that the United States can be doing today. So our organization is focused very much on policy, on changing policy here in the United States, but also working in other regions around the world to get those changes in place while the public is paying attention to this. Because as we've all discussed before, this is in the headlines now because of Daesh, but Daesh did not start the looting and trafficking of antiquities. They're not going to be the last group to do it. But we do have an opportunity now, while lawmakers are focused on this issue, to hopefully implement the laws and policy that should have been implemented long ago.
From the perspective of saving antiquities for everyone, if I say something like the relationship between SAFE and the Antiquities Coalition has never been stronger, that makes me sound way too much like a Washingtonian politician. But we really do have a strong collaborative sense to work together. And I think we complement each other in the awareness that we raise. SAFE is really interested now in bringing a platform to the community that can really be used by anyone around the globe. We have a very geographically diverse board, and I think one of the things that we want to see happen in the next 6 months is for our web presence to develop the capability of providing people wherever it is that they are, whether they're in Syria or whether they're in a classroom in Texas, to be able to weigh in and to be able to offer their perspective on maybe something happening in their neighborhood or maybe a talk that's happening at home. What SAFE wants to do is build that community online, because I think that is where we can get everyone working together. The protection of cultural heritage is something that I don't think we can do on our own, in a room, in a lecture hall. It has to find a way to involve people whose houses are being destroyed and whose landscapes are being devastated. So what SAFE is interested in doing is, I think, just the natural counterpart to what the Antiquities Coalition is doing, which is coming at it from the ground up as opposed to policy and laws from the top down.
And if I could just add, I think in the United States in particular, I think the work of nonprofits in this area is very important because we're severely handicapped by our lack of a Ministry of Culture. Most organizations have a Ministry of Culture that would be looking at this issue all of the time, and we don't. And so the issue has fallen to the nonprofit sector, it's fallen to the academic sector. And it's a challenge because, of course, there are some things that only governments can do. And hopefully we will be seeing stronger action from the U.S. government on this issue in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I would like to open actually the floor also to questions from the audience. We have 3 very different regions that we presented here with Cambodia, Yemen, the biblical world. So if you have questions to the speakers, please welcome. Yes?
How are these items smuggled out, let's say, from various war regions? Through the military, as was the case in the Second World War, or in other ways? Through Israel, which I believe is the only country that has no restrictive laws as to the movement of antiquities, or how? Can you explain? Thank you.
Yeah, maybe speaking for Yemen, there were different. Can you hear me? Yeah, there are different ways. Not everything is really proved, but on the one hand side, we heard from UNESCO that also sometimes refugees take some objects on the way with a boat from Aden to Djibouti. One maybe a small way out of the country. The other one is more in the direction of to the green border of Saudi Arabia and Oman. And as I know from my own experience, is that a lot of objects land in the Gulf. In the customs, I saw a lot of objects, for instance, in Qatar from Saudi Arabia, some fakes, but also original ones. And then they find the way directly to the other countries. Yeah? So that's to Jordan, Israel, wherever, and then maybe also to Europe and UK, US, and everywhere.
Tess, maybe.
So I think one reason that the crisis is such today in Iraq and Syria, and there are many reasons, of course, for this, but it's gotten so easily to transport things. People and objects can move so quickly and so easily now. So if you do get a piece to the Turkish border, to the Lebanese border, it can be around the world in a matter of days, if not hours. It can be for sale in a matter of hours with the click of a button. And indeed, we are seeing particularly groups like the Day After Project that's working with people on the ground in Iraq and Syria and have informants there, that traffickers are using technology very much to their advantage. They're using Skype, they're using Snapchat, they're using probably programs I've never heard of to get these pieces sold and to sell them quickly and then to ship them around, possibly around the world. There have been seizures in Bulgaria, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because we see these pieces following established trafficking routes. If you're shipping guns, if you're shipping drugs, may as well ship antiquities on the same networks. But the FBI has warned last year in August that they have received credible evidence that these pieces are reaching the U.S. market. They haven't pointed to anything publicly, but that warning is out there. And they also backed it up with a further warning that if you are knowingly buying and dealing in these pieces, you can be subject to terrorist financing laws as well as the standard laws for dealing in stolen property.
Just a follow-up, because both of you referred to the red lists that have been out there for some years, actually already for Syria, prior to last year. So how do you think, are these red lists actually helpful also in, where are these red lists visible? Are they being shown at airports in countries, or what would you wish these red lists to be more visible, perhaps, maybe?
Yeah, also really, to be honest, when I heard the first time about the red list, I thought that this is a list, a very huge list about all the stolen objects from one country, yeah? And that you need only a click and then you find the objects maybe, so this was the first impression. But as I expressed, it's only a list of the categories of the types of objects which could be looted and so on. So as I heard also from Francine Desmarais, that she told me that the lists are always at the custom office, and they found a lot of objects. No? That at least you know that this is a special type, a special jewelry, a special coin from this area, which is under risk. And I think this helps really a lot. Yeah, but I think we have to make it much more public, because that everybody really knows this, and that is not only a small circle who knows about this red list.
Yep, so there were a lot of questions actually in the upper part.
I just have two questions. The first question is, what is the lesbian, gay, or transgender community saying about this in this part of the world? And then can you explain what the real monopoly is in that part of the world and what's going on over there and how they've monopolized this situation?
So the question is about specific gender-related roles in the antiquities trade?
Human rights.
I'm not sure if there's actually a difference between certain groups being more alert to antiquities trade than not. So maybe you can expand your question perhaps a little bit to...
Just culturally, I think that those groups could have some type of influence in that part of the world, whether you are lesbian, gay, straight, or transgender. And then also just explaining what the monopoly is in terms of maybe how other countries who aren't in that part of the world could understand really how they could foster what they can do to, get involved. If there's a monopoly, that seems to kind of be a barrier there, and there's no way for them to get involved.
Tess, would you like to address this question? Gender in Cambodia, maybe? Or?
Oh,
Yeah. I'm not entirely clear whether we can really here address this in this podium. So maybe another question, perhaps that we might.
With reference to the Greco-Bactrian site of Khanum that Dr. Boyne mentioned, could you tell us something about the present state of the architectural archaeological remains in Khanum? I believe that it was destroyed in the 1990s to a certain extent.
That's a good question that I don't have a direct answer to. Obviously the most famous destruction of Afghanistan was the 6th century Buddhas in Bamiyan by the Taliban in March 2001. The only evidence that I have to be able to answer your question is actually anecdotal from students who have served in the military, who have been based in Afghanistan, who have talked to me about the state of the ruins. But I don't have any direct knowledge for you about the state of Khanum.
I would like to address the question of the market again. What is the market, and what are the roles of the auction houses? For example, what is the role of the private collectors in this market, and how much it was already mentioned, how does the legal framework affect and has a positive or negative effect on this development? So auction houses and collectors.
There was an article that came out some years ago by a professor at Boston University named Rick Aleo, and the title of the article was "Collectors Are the Real Looters." This is a demand-driven crime. I've talked to looters in Cambodia, and each one, without exception, when you ask them what could be done to stop this problem, and they say, oh, nothing, as long as someone's willing to pay money for an antiquity, we'll find a way to steal it. It doesn't matter how well the sites are protected. You can't protect an entire country. And again, the United States, we have many archaeological sites, and many of them are being terribly looted probably at this moment. So if we, with all of our resources, can't do this, how can we expect a country in a war zone to do the same? There is still a demand for looted art. If there weren't this demand, we would not be seeing looting so visible that it is literally, looting so extensive that it is literally visible from space. Those objects are going somewhere. We might not have an object that we can point to in the newspaper that was looted by Daesh and profited Daesh, but we're seeing thousands, if not tens of thousands, of holes in the ground. That's tens of thousands of objects. They're going somewhere. And collectors, of course, do drive the demand. Irreputable, I think museums have improved a great deal in recent years, and actually with Cambodia, we've had a great working relationship with many museums in the United States. But some museums are still driving the demand, and some auction houses are still driving the demand. But we can't stop there. As Alex mentioned this morning, a lot of people are complicit in this trade. Think for every piece that goes on auction, someone has to conserve it. Someone has to photograph it. Someone has to appraise it. Someone has to do the write-up and the catalog about where it came from and how. That's a lot of different professionals, and a lot of people most likely with PhDs. Perhaps someone shopping on eBay doesn't know that this is an issue. Someone who has a PhD in art history certainly does. Where are these people, and what are they? Who are the people who are doing this? And so there's a lot of people. It doesn't stop with the collectors. And I think that's one reason such a multifaceted approach is needed. And perhaps I'm being too lawyerly here, but I think increased criminal prosecutions as well.
Yes.
Okay, Tess Davis. I just, hearing your talk, which I thought was really fascinating. We seem to have been through this so many times. Countries coming under, countries in situations of civil conflict, and their cultural heritage comes under wholesale assault. Syria today, Iraq. Before that, Afghanistan, Cambodia, Guatemala in the 1970s. It's almost like a kind of a script, when countries come in when a country's in a situation of civil war, that that its heritage comes under this wholesale assault. So I'm wondering, just with so much experience with this now and so much, such a repetition of this, what in your opinion works to curb the demand for antiquities looted from countries in civil wars? What after all these experiences over so many decades, what do we start to see as some of the things that actually do work to combat the demand for these antiquities?
That's a very difficult question, actually, because in recent years, in recent decades, despite increased education, despite all these things, we're seeing what happened to Cambodia in the 1970s happen again, perhaps on a much larger scale, certainly many more countries. And this is 40 years later, and I can tell you it's very frustrating having seen Cambodia's tragedy being repeated today. But I think there is reason to be optimistic, especially, I've actually seen a huge sea change, I think. I don't know if my colleagues would agree, but in the last 5 years in particular. I think there's been a switch in the US government that it's starting to take this more seriously. We've been seeing great work by the Department of Homeland Security investigations in particular. For example, there was a case 25 years ago now of a piece from Cyprus that was stolen from the conflict there. And it showed up in Indiana, of all places. So don't think it's just New York that these places are coming to. It showed up in Indiana, and Cyprus tried to get the feds involved, and there's just not interest there. You change the situation today. ICE is doing a great job. The FBI is doing a great job. Federal attorneys are doing a great job. But again, they need more resources. They need resources, and they need the politicians to back them up. And there certainly are, I think, in Congress right now, some real leaders in this area. Representative Engel, Keating, are really pushing for legislation to try to address this issue. And we see small successes. And the success I see in Cambodia, which I think, again, provides some hope for what's happening now, is in recent years, Cambodia has recovered 7 masterpieces that were all looted during the chaos leading up to the killing fields, and trafficked throughout the world, ending up at top institutions in the United States. Sotheby's, Christie's, the Met, Cleveland, Denver, Dallas, Norton Simon. Again, geographical representation here. Within the last 3 years, they've been able to bring these pieces home to great fanfare, to ceremonies presided over by the Prime Minister, and to literally make these statues whole. They had the feet, actually, for a lot of these, and so they've literally put them back together now. And through this experience, they've built great, and I should also mention that with the exception of one case, all of those returns were voluntary. The Met and Christie's are particularly to be commended for Christie's acted proactively. They found a piece that they had sold years ago, saw it was linked to this, and returned it. Would that have happened 10 years ago? I don't think so. And the Met is also to be highly commended because when Cambodia went to them with evidence, they returned it right away. No negotiation, short negotiations. Yes, this is stolen. They said in the press, we were presented with evidence. Gave it right back. That would not have happened years ago. And it's enabled them to build relationships that I hope are benefiting the museums as much as they're benefiting Cambodia. And I think one I find it at least amusing example of this, the Cleveland Museum sent Cambodia a piece back that they thought fit to a piece in Cambodia. Cambodia tried it, it actually didn't fit. They scanned it into a computer and figured out it fit a piece in Cleveland. All of the shipping for nothing, which I'm sure was not cheap. And Cambodia sent it back to Cleveland. They repatriated a statue to Cleveland, which I can tell you I never thought would happen either. And Cambodia actually just sent a piece to France to fit a piece there. France sent another fragment to fit a piece in Cambodia. And again, these things would not have happened when I started doing this 10 years ago. Never would have happened. So I think there is growing awareness on the parts of museums, on the parts of some auction houses, that there's an opportunity for them to be real leaders here and set the standards. And that eventually will trickle down to the rest of the market. I think the question that for Iraq and Syria is that going to be in time. With the destruction we're seeing, at the rate we're seeing sites that have survived for millennia being destroyed in weeks and months. If we cut off the market today, is that still going to be happening? I think it's a pressing question.
Yes.
There was a controversy with the Northern Salmon Museum. One of the major suppliers. I was there last year with, and I think the Apsara statue from Cambodia. Was that solved?
Yes, that one is now back in Phnom Penh.
And another question. Thank you. Will there be a sort of control, for example, like with eBay, on what people can post on eBay, because you find basically everything, and a good percentage of the art which is sold on eBay is it's not false. So is there some sort of check or stringent sort of research doing for blocking or preventing this to be sold, this art to be sold on eBay?
I've been told that eBay is beginning to realize that this is a problem, largely because they keep ending up in the Daily Mail. No one wants to be in the Daily Mail. And we have seen, as you mentioned, pieces on sale for, I believe you mentioned as well. And certainly we've seen a lot of Cambodian pieces there too. I know countries that have had very positive experiences with eBay that have reached out and asked them to pull things. The challenge is there's so much material and they're not monitoring it. And that's something I think where the public could have a big influence, because right now, just the stats on the art market, online sales made up 7% this year. There's no separating that out for antiquities, but I would think it's probably growing and growing and growing. And so that does seem to be one area where action could be taken and where the public voice could have an impact in forcing a company to do the right thing. Admittedly difficult as it is, again, to monitor these sales.
I would like to ask one question to Iris. We saw the damaged areas with all those holes in the soil. So I was wondering, the loss of such antiquities or the destruction of such sites, what does it mean to the professional archaeologist? I mean, it cannot be recovered, definitely, but what can you estimate the loss of this, and how much does it affect the aim of archaeology to preserve humankind's memory? Can this be reconstructed, or is there really a loss of this memory? How do we evaluate what is taking place there?
Yeah, it's always difficult to say in how many percent is destroyed from such a site. No? I saw some from Isin, from Iraq, and also one from Sauda in north of Yemen. But definitely, if you only make one hole, yeah, and it is the wrong hole and the wrong place, yeah, you can destroy maybe a huge part of the whole site. So it's always a question. If you think about Palmyra or all the other sites which are totally destroyed, there is now, and maybe you follow up the discussion about how to reconstruct the site. What can we do? Can we do a 3D scan just of the Hadrian's or the Baal temple and all the construction? Or what can we do? I mean, there are different ways, and always there is a discussion how what kind of reconstruction we would like to have, or do we want to have it like it is in the damaged form, like it is now, like a memory. So I think the best, there is no one solution for that. Yeah, there is a great loss, and it depends really on the destruction and the damages in each side. But on the other hand, my own opinion is for Palmyra, why not to reconstruct some of these monuments again? Yeah, and we can do it as carefully together with UNESCO and very carefully in the right state-of-the-art method to make first the documentation and everything what is necessary, and then to re-erect and reinstall these monuments again. And why not also to show that we are able to do this? Yeah, and so for me, I think there are so different ways to deal with this destruction. But from the scientific point of view, there is a lost, and we never know. And also, I don't know exactly where in these holes. Huh? And as you said, there are so many objects we never will see. They are in some rooms, wherever. Yeah, so we never know exactly what is lost. Yeah.
Can I speak to that as an archaeologist, but also as a historian? The city of Dura Europos that we saw was one of the examples that Tess mentioned. Swiss cheesed by thousands of holes is an important site for many reasons. It is the very first Christian church known archaeologically. It is the city that preserves for us the very first Christian church known archaeologically. It dates to the 3rd century. It is the city that preserves outstanding figural paintings of the Jewish community that worshipped right down the street, immediately down the street from this Christian community. And further up the road, there were polytheists and the people we call pagans. This city is a microcosm of diversity that is an extraordinary story that has been gutted. The potential for a researcher, not just an archaeologist, but for a historian of religion, to recover the stories of that diversity are now gone. And what I would love for us to be able to wrap our heads around is that in the decimation of those events, as researchers, we have to be very wary and self-aware that other people can try to fill that absence now with new stories of their own. And I think that's what's happening with the Museum of the Bible. While we lose access to the things that make the world of Christianity and Judaism and the Roman Empire complex, what is being presented to us in a box that we'll visit as a museum is a story that is very traditional and almost unquestioning in terms of its explanation for the rise of these religious movements in antiquity. They were persecuted. They needed religious freedom. They needed to separate themselves from society. All of the archaeological material that I've ever looked at always tells a different story. And what we're seeing now is this debate play out in memory here in our city and in our conversation about what we do with the absence of this material. So it's a story that affects the Syrian people, but it's a story that also affects us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there was a question here. Yep.
Yes, looting has been going on for centuries, and I would like perhaps a little additional clarification on what the ethical and legal responsibilities are of museums to return antiquities to the countries of the indigenous countries.
Who wants to answer?
I can, or if you do, if you
You
want. So legally or ethically or both? So we've accepted, the international community has accepted 1970 as a bright line. It's not necessarily a legally binding line, but it's been incorporated in the 1970 UNESCO Convention, the main agreement on the illicit trade. It's been incorporated in a number of museum ethical codes, and also things like dealer codes, and so depending on the organization. So this has been accepted as this bright line, that objects before 1970, everyone has to play game here. Objects before 1970, source countries won't request them back if they were out of the country before then. After 1970, if you can't prove that an object was out of, say, Cambodia by 1970, you should give it back. Now, does that always work in practice? No. But I think it is increasingly, year by year, growing, getting more acceptance. And I should also say that 1970, fine. We didn't have the UNESCO Convention. There wasn't enough awareness about looting. Looting wasn't happening as extensively as it is today. But I would also like to point out that as I've heard a prosecutor in New York say, is every day that you get further from 1970, it grows harder and harder and harder to believe that you don't have provenance. If you flip through an auction catalog, you've seen a lot of pieces attributed to old collections. Or collectors who'll say, oh, it left, we're not sure when. Well, think about this. These antiquities, especially when we're getting into the expensive line of things. Antiquities are, many of them are expensive. Expensive objects come with long paper trails. Whether it's insurance forms, whether it's shipping forms, whether it's a family photograph. If something was passed down in a will, where is that? So I, for one, am very skeptical of someone saying a Cambodian antiquity is legitimate, but we can't prove that it was out of the country, before 1970. And I'm sorry, this is a very confusing subject because we often have so that's ethically. This has been accepted by the museum community, at least on paper, this 1970 Bright Line Rule. Legally, it's a completely different story. That depends on what the antiquity is, which country it's from. There's different rules for Cambodia than there is for Greece and there is for Italy because it depends on the laws that were enacted in these countries as when they claimed ownership of these materials. And as you can imagine, that's one reason the red lists are so important. How confusing this must be for a customs agent. If you see a piece coming in at the border, is this from Yemen? Is it from Saudi Arabia? Is it from Iraq? Or Cambodia? Is it from Cambodia? Is it from Thailand? What year did it leave Cambodia? Oh, if it left in this year, it's okay. We don't have to seize it. Oh, if it left in this year, we have to pay careful attention. It's a very, very complicated system, and I think it's clear it's not working for that reason. So I'm sorry, that's a very roundabout answer to a very important question. But the shortest answer is it depends on a number of factors, which is one reason that this is so difficult, not just for countries who are trying to reclaim these pieces, but for the reputable actors in the art market as well. Museums who are trying to do the right thing face a lot of challenges themselves, often in figuring out how to go about that.
I think maybe to add also we see a trend now in museums having provenance curators or provenance researchers. So I mean this is only I think in the last maybe 10 years that we have persons directly employed in museums also who look particularly on this theme. So there's a trend I think that goes into the direction of looking closer at what's in your own backyard, to say.
Also before, maybe just to add this, also before there were a lot of regulations for excavation fines to divide the fines between the countries. Yeah, so at least until the 1980s, 1990s, some at least to bring some potteries to the country. So this is also something we have to imagine that there sometimes is a legal background for this dividing of objects and bring the objects to museums.
Yeah. I think the Museum of the Bible is a good example. They signed an agreement with the Israel archaeological authorities also to have objects from Israel here on display. There were other questions, perhaps two more. Yep.
I have a two-part question. The first one, you spoke previously about working with the communities on greater knowledge and greater awareness, but you also mentioned highly sophisticated trafficking networks as well as what are likely very high-end buyers and a secretive market. What space is there for NGOs and non-governmental organizations to kind of clamp down or improve the situation with those type of advanced networks? And then if there's any space at all. And then the second question is, where do you see the largest problem? Is it with the eBay buyers, those that maybe aren't aware of the cultural value? Is it with the high-end, more secretive communities? Is it with the institutions? What do you see as the greatest threat or greatest challenge?
I'll venture the theme of my talk, the kind of answer behind all of the pages, which is I think that one of the biggest challenges is inciting and building moral outrage. And I think if you look at the way that people have approached ethical causes or moral causes over time, it's usually something that catches fire amongst the broader population, amongst the broader than the community that's just interested, that really starts to shape when these things become important to other people. So whether that's with environmentalism or cultural heritage, there's a sense to which I think you want someone just seated around the dinner table saying, we don't want oil in our Gulf. I think that's absurd. We don't want nuclear waste near our house. I think that's absurd. We don't want looted artifacts coming into our country at art market. That's absurd. I think what we need to do is build a way towards that sense of outrage that's just natural amongst people. And that's just my perspective that I wanted to put out there before we talk more about specific policies or specific things related to NGOs. But my feeling is that that's what needs to happen. So that's just to get us started.
Well, in terms of the local community and to build on what Doug said is, I think it depends on two things. Because, for example, in a country like Cambodia, you have these opportunistic looting going on. That may be poor villagers situation like that. And then you have the organized criminal networks. The poor villagers you can certainly work with education, with providing economic opportunity, with bringing tourists to the site so there's more economic incentive to protect it than destroy it. That's obviously not going to work with the professional criminals. But what I found interesting in Cambodia, one looter that we worked very closely with, who'd been the top trafficker in his area for about 20 years, he trafficked thousands of massive pieces out of the country. And now he has been working with us to try to get a better understanding of what happened, because it's the hugest regret in his life. And this is someone who was a Khmer Rouge cadre and part of the killing squads. And he feels that with this selling off his children's heritage, he's cursed his family, and he's trying to make it right. And what we're seeing, I think, is what Doug mentioned, the importance, getting across to the public the importance of this, getting across to the government the importance of this, because it's not just about statues, and it's not even just about economics. For example, the reason that Daesh is targeting these pieces, that they're targeting these sites, and by the way, this is, I should mention that despite what we're seeing in the headlines, by far most of the sites they are intentionally destroying are Muslim sites, because there is no greater threat to Daesh than moderate Muslims, no greater threat at all, and that's who they're targeting by far more than anyone. Statistically, only 3% of the sites that they've destroyed have been ancient. But they're targeting those sites because those are what matter the most to the people. That's why they're doing it, to inflict the most harm on the people that they possibly can. And I think it's the same for us. And I think on a personal level, I guess it's hard for a country like the United States that thinks of itself, rightly or wrongly, as having a very recent history, to get our head around the idea of living in a place that has a history that's 5,000 years old, and of having sites that are, that important and have been important not just for generations but for millennia. And what happens to people when those are taken away basically overnight. I live in New Orleans, and one place I have never gotten the question of why is this important, what you do hear from people, when there's a war going on, why should we care about this when there's so many terrible things? No one in New Orleans has ever asked me that question, because everyone I've talked to who lost their house, who lost their car, who lost every single belonging, the one they care about most is the family photo album, because that's their heritage. That's what they would trade everything to have back. And that's, that on a scale times 1,000,000 is what's being lost today.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stop here. So I would like to thank again our three speakers for being here tonight with us.